Hello, I'm Elliot Bloom, and you're listening to Celebrating Cinema, a podcast for the love of cinema. If you love what we do here at Celebrating Cinema, you can show your support by leaving us a review on whichever podcast platform you listen on. It really does help other fellow cinema lovers find us. We're happy to announce that for our next edition of our film club, we'll be screening Francis Ford Coppola's One from the Heart on the 11th of December, in connection to our upcoming episode all about big megalomaniac films, tied to Francis Ford Coppola's release of Megalopolis. This will be with an introduction from our very own Hugo Amazal, and you can find a link to tickets in the show notes. For this episode, I'm speaking to Rich Peppiatt, director of the incredible film Kneecap.
Tell me something about you. Something you've never told anyone else.
I'm a rapper. There are 80,000 native Irish speakers in Ireland.
Ní fac, I chéad gan teanga ach lá náisiúm.
3 of us have become rappers.
You may know the words, but you don't understand the language.
Ers muoin siad bhríomh fá chóirt fan ceol.
Deir sé go studio aige.
Well,
Agus rent beats.
cinneál like. Well, you hear Abbey Road, Abbey what? Agus seo boys. And Roland 808. You are siad argar BS rio like for ceoltarí fwy like grammar when siad blastas bin na dahri sian hip hop. Good John and your. Do I look like I want to read subtitles? Ian, dog, tree.
As you heard, Kneecap is the story of the first Irish-speaking hip-hop group of the same name. The term kneecap refers to the brutal form of punishment during the Troubles of the 1970s, when political enemies were shot in the knee, an act that speaks to the raw, visceral violence of the era. Set against the backdrop of Belfast, a city divided between Irish Republicans and British Loyalists, Kneecap focuses on the generation after the ceasefire in Northern Ireland, centred on an unlikely and fiercely defiant friendship between two childhood friends, Mowgli Bap as Nurse and Mochara as Liam, with an Irish language teacher, JJ, played by DJ Provi. Through the lens of this friendship, Rich Peppiatt brings us the story of how a hip-hop group resists the erasure of their indigenous culture. Rich's uncompromising approach to filmmaking marks Kneecap as a striking debut. His work is exhilarating, a testament to the power of cinema. I'm eager to explore the creative vision behind this unforgettable film and directing the group Kneecap. Hi Rich, welcome to Celebrating Cinema. It's great to have you on speaking with us. We always start by asking our guests, what is your first memory of film or cinema, your first formative memory?
Oh, that's a tough question straight out the gate. That is.
Yeah.
What is my first memory of cinema? Okay, so my good friend of mine, a guy called Rich Taylor, he was from a big cinephile family, and I didn't grow up in a family that were particularly into film, but he had a Betamax, right? His family went heavy into Betamax. They were, they that was the horse they picked, and they had every film that you could imagine on Betamax. And so going around Rich Taylor's house would be a real sort of deep dive exploration into all sorts of films. That was my education, I think, first in film was going around his house. But I think also the film that sticks with me the most, I think, is just deeply kind of implanted in my mind was when I was a child, probably about, 9 years old, and going to Canada to visit, to stay with some family, and the cousin, who was maybe 15, 16, was babysitting, and he decided to put on It, right? And I was so scared. It was, I watched that film, and then I was sleeping in the basement. And that night, I'm lying in bed, could barely get a wink of sleep. I was so scared. And then the door creaks open, and there's these footsteps coming down into the basement. And I literally was like, "This is it. It's freaking Pennywise." And then the cat jumped on the bed.
Oh my God.
Great. But it was just, So the power of cinema was very much, impressed upon me in that one film. Probably it's also one of those questions that I'll be in bed tonight, and suddenly I think, oh, I know completely something else. But there you That's what you've got.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's always it's amazing how much you can remember all of a sudden just with that question. And again, a very visceral experience to recall, which I guess we can somehow connect to Kneecap also being a very visceral experience. But before we dive into the film itself, I wanted perhaps then how this first experience of cinema, but since then your relationship with cinema has sort of shaped you in a way that wanted you to make films, or it was something you knew as a way to communicate whatever story you wanted to tell.
Yeah, I mean, I was never someone who grew up wanting to be a filmmaker. It really was not a career path that I ever really considered. I was someone who had always written, and I first got into script writing, I suppose, sort of after university, just sort of as much as a bit of fun. I had a friend of mine, a guy called Danny Wigley, who I've written with since uni, and we started out writing sitcoms, not very good ones, but trying our hand at sitcoms. Yeah, that very very much throwing all your weight behind a genre that's dying on its arse was probably not the way to go. But we did actually our first sitcom we wrote got optioned by Hat Trick, and the production company in London who sort of done quite a lot of big stuff. And I thought we'd made it. I thought that was up on the gravy train, and actually they sat on it for about 18 months and then released a sitcom that was remarkably similar with exactly the same name as our sitcom.
Oh, really?
Oh, and I was absolutely fuming. Fuming. I was like, "There's no," and their excuse was that one side of the office hadn't spoken to another side of the office, and I'm like, "I've been to your office. You can spit and hit one side of it. I mean, how much, So anyway, Hat Trick Productions, if you're listening, fuck you.
Look at me now.
But yeah, after that, we wrote a few more things and never went anywhere. And then I became a journalist, and that was a terrible career choice for me. And I ended up quitting very publicly and leaked my resignation letter to The Guardian. And then I did a stand-up comedy show, given that I'd blown up my career in journalism. I did a stand-up comedy show at the Edinburgh Festival, and it went pretty well. And I ended up touring it sort of around the UK, basically to try and make the money back that you lose in Edinburgh, which is just an extortionate amount. They've got this weird system where you have to sort of you buy like 80% of the tickets for your show, and it's like, so the venue's guaranteed to 80%, and anything above that 80% is your profit. But if you don't make, if you get like 20% full, then you're paying for 60%. So it's a very demoralizing thing. Stand there on a Monday lunchtime, realizing it's costing you about $3,000 to perform your hour-long show. But if you could, if you can get some laughs with that in your head, then you're doing all right. But anyway, so I one day Hugh Grant and Steve Coogan turned up, and they said, "Look, we really enjoyed the show. Have you ever thought about making it into a film?" And I was like, well, no. But, when Hugh Grant and Steve Coogan come up to you and say, "Do you want to make a film?" I wasn't exactly a man replete with life choices at the time. I went, well, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So I got a little bit of money. I mean, it was kind of, very small amount of money I managed to pull together with their help. And I started making a documentary that became a film called One Rogue Reporter. It was about me going after tabloid newspaper editors and delving into their private lives and hiring paparazzi to follow them around. It was basically about testing the limits of privacy and public interest and freedom of expression, right? By turning the tables. And that was like, for me, this real baptism of fire. I had no idea how to make a film. So me and a friend of mine who worked in TV, a guy called Tom Jenkinson, it was us. We made the film, and the credit list is embarrassing because it's just like, it's just our names repeated over and over again. But it was also the best way to learn how to make a film, because it was like you made so many stupid mistakes, but because you have the responsibility of so much stuff, you just learn. I mean, the edit was hilarious because I remember sitting there and fine editing the the first 5 minutes of the film before we'd even got to the rest of it. And then obviously once you've done that, and that took you like a month, right? And then you realise like next bit, oh, I didn't need that bit at all. Like, there's got to be a more efficient system than this, right?
Yeah.
But you just didn't. We just that's how green we were. Was we just had no idea. But as I say, it was a real baptism of fire, and it's got a real lo-fi moxie about it. It's like I couldn't sit and watch it today. I'd just be watching it from behind the sofa. But I think it kind of worked for the sort of film it was, and it premiered at Sheffield Dockfest, and I got a distributor straight out of that, and ended up on Netflix. And yet again, we were like, oh, this is easy. And it only took me 10 years to release my next film. So
Yeah. Which is markedly different, and we'll touch upon that in a minute. But it's also funny to hear sort of your naivety, perhaps, of first making your own film and the parallels of that to Kneecap and them just starting out in a garage making their own music. But how does an Englishman manage to convince an Irish hip hop group that you're the man to tell their story?
Well, I mean, to be honest, One Rogue Reporter is not a bad. It was one of the things that they, when I first met them, that they watched, and I think that they felt in that a kindred spirit. Do you know what I mean? That kind of like DIY,
Yeah.
slightly anarchic approach to life that they very much have. It's certainly something that I have.
Yeah.
I think we bonded. Originally I just met them I went to one of their gigs, and I thought they were great, and spent a few months badgering them. But then when I finally did sort of sit down and have a pint with them, I sort of told them who I was and what I'd done, and they did go away and do their homework, and they said, look, we really, we loved it. And I think that helped. Also, my wife is from West Belfast, where they're from, and I think that adds like if you can marry a West Belfast girl, then you can probably put up with us. And yeah, I mean, we're just it started out just really not really trying to put too much pressure on the situation of what it could become. They knew I wanted to make some sort of film, but it was probably 6 months of just hanging out and drinking and kind of just getting to know each other before that really took any sort of form as to me kind of going, it's going to be a feature film, and I want you to play yourselves in it.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking about is how this is, well, more about yourself as a writer and telling the story. It's based on Kneecap, a hip hop group. If you could perhaps share a little bit about the context of, I think, the character of Belfast as a city within this film, and a bit of history for our European audience who are perhaps not so familiar with Ireland's relationship with Belfast, a northern city of Ireland, but also how you as a writer sort of, I felt within the story, sort of let the story tell itself rather than trying to find any other ways to tell it. It seemed like it was there to be told, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, on that last point, I suppose it was quite handy, the fact that Belfast is a city that's to this day very divided. If you look on a map, for people who are completely uninitiated, you have the island of Ireland, and a part of it in the north, which is ostensibly a different country called Northern Ireland. But that was obviously not always so. It was not, Northern Ireland is part of the United Kingdom. It's always been the aim of Republicans in Ireland to get, to reunite the country and have Ireland as a whole place. And I mean, there's a lot of different arguments as to why Northern Ireland, it should remain part of the UK and all of that. But really, to me, as an outsider who, is no real skin in the game, is that you've only got to look at the map and look at it and see it's not attached at all to England and Scotland and Wales to kind of go, well, hang on, that's just a bit of someone else's island, right? It's good. So it's like any art, if you just fell from space, and landed and went like, someone was told you need to decide on who's right here, it'd be quite simple, because you go, well, clearly that little bit up there is just part of someone else's island, right? So why don't you fuck off? And then it would all be resolved. Now, it's obviously not that simple, because there's hundreds of thousands of people who were born through no fault of their own in the north of Ireland and consider themselves British, and it's not their fault that they were born there. and they're quite within their rights to believe what they want to believe and all things like that. But yeah, that is the context under which a band like Kneecap have come up, because they are staunch Republicans, want to see Ireland reunited. They come from the Catholic community, the big divide is between Catholicism and Protestants, which feels very medieval, but it is. It's still, and yeah, obviously the Troubles is the war that was occurring with the IRA against the British state through the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s is what Belfast is very much known for. But Kneecap are part of the post ceasefire generation. They never lived through the Troubles, but the reverberations of that war very much still carry on. And when you talk about Belfast as a city, it's a city which very much the character of those 30, 40 years of war are written everywhere, be it in the murals, be it still in damaged places, be it in historical landmarks. It's all very kind of writ all over. And so, yes, you're right to say that Belfast, it became a character for the film. And I live in Belfast. And so you had this interesting thing where you're shooting a film in the place that you live. It's almost like you've been wrecking it ever since you moved
Yeah,
there, in a way.
yeah.
I mean, you kind of know innately where you want to shoot things, and in a way that normally in a film you wouldn't, right? So it was, with our locations manager, it was more a matter of going, right, we're going to do this there, this there, this there, this there. Easiest job in the world for him. Well, I mean, I say the easiest job, not the easiest job when you're saying, I want to shoot that there. And he's like, you want to shoot a scene where an Orange Order band are chasing Liam over a bridge above the most fervent loyalist estate in the whole of Belfast. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I want to do. He's like, you will get killed. And I'm like, maybe, but it's got the perfect curvature, that hill. It just had that Lawrence of Arabia. There's not many sort of roads that quite have the Lawrence of Arabia curvature.
Here you're already touching on sort of like the visual aspects of this film, which is very clear, the bold, striking vision that you have. And I wondered how, as it's a film about language and the use of language as a resistance, how the visual medium of cinema helps you to tell this story.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a filmmaker who I think I'm quite happy to visually lean into the work of films that have come before, right? I think some filmmakers really don't like the idea that anything that they do isn't like only magic from their head, that
Yeah.
they're genius. When in fact, obviously that's not true, is that we're all very influenced by what we've watched before it. And, there's a few reference points for me in Kneecap, which would be Train Spotting, would be a big one. Lahane
Yeah.
would be another one. And one that people never get, which is Amelie,
Mm.
which my youngest daughter's called Amelie, and it's one of my favorite films. And just a very, very distinct visual style, and a
Yeah.
very like it really its color palette, its visual feel. It was very bold and really took a lot of risks in
Yeah.
choices. And it was something that really stuck. I think it's probably the first foreign language movie that I ever really kind of like connected with, and was I think kind of one of those films that really opened up for me. Because it's got subtitles doesn't mean it's shit. do, you know what I mean? It was like opened up a whole new world of cinema for me. And anyway, so that's always one that I kind of think of just for its boldness. And then I suppose the commitments as well, because if you think about film and music films set in Ireland, the commitments is the big one. But yeah, so you've got in Kneecap, you've got like your famous Lahane scene with the mirror, right? That's like my take on it, by using how can you take it to the next level? And that was to put a balaclava on the face of,
Yeah.
like how, that, which literally meant having to put a balaclava on the camera
Yeah.
in order to pull it off. And so, I like the idea of paying homage to what's come before. We have our own sort of worst toilet in Scotland scene when he climbs in the bin. It's a very obvious kind of doff of the cap. So yeah, I mean, I think that sort of meta-ness is something that is there for people who are really into cinema, like as a little kind of like in joke, but obviously doesn't affect people who are not. People who just want to watch it casually and don't get the references. that's cool as well. But as I said, Kneecap was very much like, it took me so long to be able to get the opportunity to make my first narrative feature that I sort of said to myself, I am just going to go out and make the film that I want to make, right? That is exactly the sort of film that I want to see.
Yeah.
Everything in it that I like and that I look for in the film. And I don't care if that doesn't work. And if audiences, don't react positively to it, I can live with that.
Yeah.
Because I did it my own way, right? But I could never live with the idea that I would kind of compromise and kind of water down Kneecap and almost sanitize it. And then it doesn't. And then you lie there in bed 6 months later going, if only. Do you know what I mean? That to me, I couldn't live with that. So I was very dictatorial in the fact that I was going to do it exactly. I had a vision and I was going to stick to it come hell or high water.
I mean, it's very hard to pull off that vision as your first narrative feature, but I think watching it, you really feel there are no compromises in it, which I think is a testament to perhaps, let's say, your stubbornness, but also just knowing what you want to communicate. But speaking of meta-ness, one meta aspect that really stood out to me was Michael Fassbender's role, which perhaps it's just simply because he is such a fantastic actor and his own Irish heritage, but his role as Bobby Sands in Steve McQueen's Hunger, I think for me, immediately spoke to me in his character of Arlo, the sense of a connection with the past, someone who had resisted in some way, perhaps had succeeded to a certain extent, but the fact that Arlo, his character, sort of has to perhaps come to terms with how effective his own resistance was or how much change he was able to create. And then his son, Mowgli, who's able to perhaps resist in a new way that is more reflective of the living conditions of today by using music that appeals to a wider audience. And I wondered if you were thinking about that relationship at all as well when directing scenes with Michael Fassbender.
Yeah, look, I think that's a really well put response to his role in it. I mean, it was certainly the first conversation I had with Michael was well, I'll go back a little bit further than that to say that, there's only a handful of kind of what you'd call top tier Irish actors who speak Irish, right? And so I guess when you're trying to make a film, you kind of go, well, I'm going to go for the biggest people you can think of first, and then, work your way down the list, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of Michael, like we all wanted him number one straight away because of him playing Bobby Sands in Steve McQueen's Hunger, and he's such an icon in the north of Ireland for that it made such sense for kind of Arlo, given Arlo's character, for him to play that. And so when I spoke to Michael first time, I kind of said, I see that Arlo's character is almost a guy who could have been in the cell next door to Bobby Sands, right? He could have been a guy who didn't go on the hunger strike, a guy who survived, and perhaps part of his motivation is he feels guilty that he's never made the ultimate sacrifice in the same way some of his comrades done, and because he then becomes a bit of a zealot because of his way to that guilt is he can't let go of a fight that's sort of played out and is done. And I think that was something that Michael would say that Bobby Sands is probably his favorite role he's ever played.
Gosh.
And I think the opportunity to kind of reapproach some of those issues from a slightly different angle was one that he kind of relished. He might tell you that's all bollocks, and that in fact he was thinking of nothing. But I'm pretty sure that was very much in his head, and yeah, so we were delighted to get him, and it was a great coup for the film to get an actor of his stature, and also a great testament to him that he was prepared to take a risk on a film like this. It certainly didn't do it for the money. He recognized that it was an important film. He recognized that creatively, it was doing something different and wanted to be a part of that. And I think, look, throughout his career, he's taken those sorts of risks. We think about something like Frank. Do you know what I mean? A film where he's got a helmet on his head the whole time. So, he does sometimes have a brain fart and decide to do one of these weird films like ours.
Yeah, but I think it's also a testament to Kneecap themselves, who you get to play themselves, especially the car scene with Mowgli in the car with Michael Fassbender and his character Arlo. I think it's incredible. You don't see a difference in sort of quality of acting. They both hold themselves in it so well. But how is it as a director? What are you doing to give them the confidence to be themselves? Because playing yourselves is one thing, but also performing to camera rather than to a live audience is also a very different experience as well.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, we did about 6 months of acting classes before we started shooting, because it became apparent when we first started running lines that I believe everyone can act, right? It's
Yeah.
just whether you understand what acting is. And for Kneecap, their idea of acting was very much like being on stage, which was like projecting to the back of the room. It was almost more theatrical. I said, well, like, it's not really going to work if the camera's 4 inches from your face, is it?
Yeah.
Right? All that energy you've got needs to be internalized. I don't want the energy gone, but there's
Yeah.
different ways of projecting energy. It can be big and loud, or it can be small, right? You can have a lot of energy just existing in your eyes and doing nothing else. And so we got involved an acting coach called Kieran Lagan, and he was absolutely fantastic. And he basically designed this course over 6 months. Every Friday we'd get together, and I did the course with them because 3 is kind of an awkward number. And really some of the core things that were really important were the idea that acting is almost the opposite of what you think it is. Acting is more about reacting than it is about acting, right? It's more about listening than doing anything, right? And so these core principles, once they started kind of seeping in, it was like week by week, like moths to butterflies, as they kind of improved and got better. But even then, it was a revelation when they actually got on set, because you take that scene there with Michael. That was one that was fairly early in the shoot, and I was nervous about, because it was one of the real big tests of whether it's going to look like a guy who won a raffle, being a film with Michael Fassbender.
Yeah.
And it comes back to this thing of like, acting being reacting, right? It's like you can only, if that is true, then you can only be as good as what you have to react off, right? And so great actors give you good things to react to, right? They give you a lot. And so suddenly you put someone who now has the toolbox, and you put them in a room with a great actor like Michael. Suddenly they have great moments to react to. They have great things to listen to, and that suddenly that raises all ships. And so I remember doing that scene, and Nisha Mowgli Bap getting out the car and coming up to me and saying, "Was that all right, mate?" And me just basically having a tear in my eye and just hugging him and being like, "Mate, you absolutely smashed that. Yeah, absolutely smashed that out of the park." And it was a great moment. It's a great moment.
They have so much natural charisma and chemistry between the three of them that, again, I think that's just something you can't teach or ever recreate with actors themselves sometimes. So
that was an important thing. It was like, people sometimes talked about, oh, can they, will they be able to act? Will they? And I said, look, you can put the 3 best actors in the world in a room together and say pretend to be a band, and it might not work. In fact, it's probably more likely than not going to work, right? But these guys have it. Like, look, because they're mates, right? That like natural kind of dynamic is something that we have built in, and that sort of charisma, that dynamic, that chemistry is really the core of the film. And to know that we have it is, to me, the most important thing ever. If we can just harness that, then I think we're onto a real winner. And I think that is the core of the film, is that that when we see them on screen together, it just feels like that they are a real band, because they are.
Yeah. I was wondering, I assume you must be a hip hop fan if you are a fan of Kneecap, but I've been thinking a lot about why it is that hip hop can connect with so many people, and sort of this idea of how language is a form of resistance, but only really through hip hop at the moment do we feel that. And I mean, ignore all sort of the superficial elements of perhaps why people are drawn to hip hop. I wonder why you think, especially in Ireland, Irish kids, or in Northern Ireland, Irish kids are learning Irish just because of the music that they're making.
Yeah, I mean, I think the band themselves would say that they don't pretend that the struggles that they have in life are comparable to the struggles that the Black community in America had during the civil rights movement that gave birth to hip hop itself. but at the same time, it is a genre that's always kind of had its heart in resistance and rebellion. And in the same way, in a weird way that Irish music has too. It sounds different, but traditional Irish music, trad music as we call it here, are rebel songs often. They are about resistance, about fighting the Brits and things like that. And so Kneecap, in a way, it makes absolute sense that, they before they were Kneecap, would have been people who would have, been singing traditional songs in pubs and things like that. So it makes absolute sense that for them to have then embraced hip hop as a comparable genre. And yeah, I mean, look, why young people in particular have sort of reacted so well to it. I mean, because it's good. They're just good at what they do, and they have their live shows. I'd always encourage people to go and see them live because they're fantastic. But I remember when I first met the band, the first thing that I did was sign up to Irish language classes, and there was about 15 people in the class, and half of them were there because they were fans of Kneecap, and that was 2019. And so I can only imagine how many Irish language classes have sprouted up now, and how many people in them are there. They're fans of their music or the film or both, and that's really cool. Like that's really it's really nice to have kind of made a film that feels like it's had that sort of impact. Do you know what I mean? I don't think it wasn't something that we necessarily went out to do.
Yeah.
But it's really nice that you've done something that feels like it's had a positive social impact, as a kind of an offshoot of it. And yeah, I think we're all really chuffed with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible just to even have that kind of measurable impact that you can see. And I have to ask, because this is a very political film, it is a film of resistance amongst many other things. But a thing that did strike me as well was the presence of Irish people wearing keffiyehs in the film throughout, and sort of a reference to this strong solidarity Irish people have had with Palestinians. Because again, you mentioned you were drawing connections with the Black community in America. Why was it important for you to include this solidarity that is very common in Ireland anyway?
Well, yeah, I mean, look, it was, yeah, again, it wasn't really forced or particularly a conscious effort. It's just about the authenticity of the people of West Belfast, where the film is set. That's what people wear. Do you know what I mean? There is a huge amount of solidarity with the Palestinian cause, and the bridge, for example, where we shot the scene with Liam running over the bridge. Sometimes they took it down maybe a few weeks before we shot, unfortunately. But that street is lined with Israeli flags, right, until halfway point, and then it's lined with Palestinian flags.
Yes, I've seen a video of this actually. Yeah,
You know what I mean? There's the center of the bridge between communities. It
yeah,
goes from one flag to another, and it just shows it's another kind of the unionist community identify very strongly with the Israeli cause, and the Republican community the opposite, the Palestinian cause. And I mean, they both like to throw accusations at each other that one only supports the other to annoy the other one. Do you know what I mean? It's like rather than any real, but that
yeah.
to be fair, certainly I would say that in West Belfast, there's a huge amount of fundraising that goes on. There's a huge amount of solidarity, and we have always been very, very forthright in the fact that it's a cause that is very close to our hearts. And Mowgli Bap at the moment's on tour, and he's running 10K every day to raise money for Palestinian aid. Which I can tell with the amount of drink and drugs that man consumes on tour, if he survives, I'll be surprised. So get your donation in now. Look it up, because he might not be around much longer.
We'll definitely include a link to that. Rich, before you go, I have to ask you, as a closing tradition on our podcast, very simply, it's a very broad question, but what are your hopes for the future?
Oh, geez. Well, you're asking me that question at a very low point in the humanities.
I know, but you can make it as personal if you want, and simply wanting to make another narrative feature or something like that. I know it's a hard
No,
time.
well, I mean, I think that it's a time when we have to do it, when you realize you just have to carry on, right? That much like making a film, It's like you have bad days, you have low moments, and ultimately you have to get up that next day and keep shooting, keep making your film, right? And then ultimately, in a few months' time, you get into the edit, and some of those moments that you thought were disastrous, you find out are absolutely fine, and actually it worked really well. And I think that just like in life at the moment, we are at a really low point, be it with the conflicts that are going on, be it with certain man being elected and what that's going to cause. But I think that we need to just keep our chins up and realize that, the only thing you can do is keep turning up day by day, keep doing what you're doing. And hopefully in the future, the near future, be able to look back and go, you know what, it wasn't quite as bad as it could have been.
If I can add to that, Rich, I think Kneecap, both the film and what you guys have made with the group Kneecap, is a testament not only of the story of resistance, but the power of stories. I think the fact that this story is now going to be able to speak to so many people, I hope they can kind of carry the message and the fire of this film with them into whatever they do, and to know that change is possible, especially no matter who you are, let's say.
Well, look, I appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was a real pleasure. Thank you, Rich. Now, there's nothing left but to go and watch the film Kneecap. You can find a link for tickets in the show notes. And as you heard from the excitement and energy with which Rich spoke, it's very much reflected in his directing style. I promise you'll be hooked from the opening sequence. Let us know what you think about the film. You can comment on our post on Instagram at Lab111. We also have Letterboxd. If you enjoy these conversations, you can show your support by leaving us a review on whichever podcast platform. It really does help more people find us. This was a Lab 111 production, edited and produced by myself, Elliot Bloom. Music from Hugo Amazel and artwork from Studio FFF.